There's a moment in every relationship when love is still there, but something else has already started to fade. This is not a story about betrayal. Not entirely. It's a story about what happens before it. Welcome to Hidden Between Us, where stories unfold in the quiet spaces between love, silence, and truth. There is a particular kind of sadness that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with raised voices, slammed doors, or dramatic departures. It settles quietly into the corners of a life, soft enough to be ignored at first, ordinary enough to be mistaken for routine. By the time it is noticed, it has already made itself at home. Daniel Hayes did not know this then. If anyone had asked him that morning, he would have said, honestly, without hesitation, that he was a fortunate man. He had a wife he loved, a son who still reached for his hand without thinking, a home that was small, yes, but theirs. And for years, Daniel had believed that if a thing was built with love, it could survive almost anything. He had not yet learned that love and enough were not always the same thing. The flat was quiet when he woke, except for the low hum of the fridge and the faint rattle of rain against the kitchen window. It was still early, that pale hour before the day properly begins, when everything feels temporarily suspended, before school uniforms, unpaid bills, unanswered emails, and all the small practicalities of being alive. Daniel moved carefully, out of habit more than necessity. He filled the kettle, set 2 mugs on the counter, and opened the cupboard above the sink. Tea bags, sugar, half a loaf of bread, and the cereal Ethan liked, but Maya said was too sugary. He smiled to himself and reached for it anyway. There was comfort in these details, in knowing what needed replacing before anyone mentioned it, in remembering that Ethan would refuse toast if the crusts were left on, and that Maya liked her tea stronger on difficult mornings, though she would never admit the mornings were difficult. Love, Daniel had always thought, lived best in small acts, not declarations, not expensive gestures, just attention. The kettle clicked. Steam rose. Behind him, he heard the bedroom door open. Maya entered the kitchen in a silk robe the color of ivory, one hand lifting her hair from the back of her neck. Even half awake, she was striking. There were some people who seemed to carry light differently, as though the world instinctively arranged itself around them. Maya had always been one of them. Daniel turned, and something in his face softened, in the way it always did when he looked at her. "You're up early," he said. She glanced at the rain-streaked window. "I could say the same to you. I've got that meeting at 10. She nodded, distracted already, crossing to the counter where she picked up her phone. Her reflection caught faintly in the dark glass of the microwave door. She looked at it for a second too long. Daniel noticed. He noticed most things about her. "Tea?" he asked. "Yes, please." He handed her a mug. She took it without looking up. "Did you remember Ethan's permission slip?" "It's in his school bag." "And his reading folder?" "Packed." that, she finally glanced at him. "You make it sound effortless." Daniel gave a small smile. "That's the trick." She almost smiled back. Almost. Then she looked around the kitchen. The narrow counter, the old cupboard handles, the water stain near the corner of the ceiling, and her expression changed in a way so slight it could have been missed by anyone who did not know her well. But Daniel knew her well. Or at least, he believed he did. He pretended not to see it. Instead, he reached for the bread and slid 2 slices into the toaster. A moment later, small feet padded into the room. Ethan appeared in dinosaur pajamas, hair untidy, eyes still heavy with sleep. He walked directly to Daniel and leaned against his leg without speaking, the way children do when they trust someone completely. Daniel rested a hand on the back of his son's head. "Morning, mate." Ethan nodded into him. "Is it raining?" "It is." "Can I wear my boots?" "You can wear your boots." This, apparently, improved the entire outlook of the day. Ethan brightened at once and climbed onto a chair, pulling the cereal box toward him. Maya watched him for a moment, her face gentler now. "Slow down," she said, as he nearly tipped milk across the table. "I am being slow," Ethan replied, with the perfect confidence only 6-year-olds possess. Daniel laughed under his breath. For a brief moment, the kitchen felt warm, real, complete in the imperfect way family life sometimes is. Maya sipped her tea. Daniel buttered toast. Ethan talked solemnly about a classroom snail named Oliver, who, according to him, was emotionally tired. Daniel did not ask what that meant. Maya did. "Emotionally tired?" Ethan nodded. "Miss said he's not moving because he needs a quiet day." Something passed through Maya's expression then. Amusement, maybe, or envy so faint it barely deserved the name. "A quiet day sounds lovely," she murmured. Daniel looked at her. "You can have one Saturday." She gave a short laugh. "Yes, because weekends in this house are famously relaxing." "I'll take Ethan out." "Where?" He shrugged. "Somewhere expensive and glamorous." Ethan gasped. "The aquarium?" Daniel lowered his voice. "Only if we can get past security." That finally earned a proper smile from Maya. It changed her whole face. And because Daniel loved her in the helpless, faithful way that some men love only once in their lives, that smile felt to him like proof. Proof that everything could still be light again, if he was patient enough, careful enough, good enough. He did not yet understand that some smiles are remnants. Beautiful, yes, but not always promises. By 8:15, the morning had unfolded into its usual rush. Ethan was dressed in his school uniform, though one sock was inside out. Maya stood by the mirror in the hallway fastening an earring, her expression sharpened by concentration. Daniel crouched near the front door, tying Ethan's laces with the steadiness of repetition. The hallway was narrow. Their umbrella stand leaned slightly to one side. There was a crack in the skirting board that Daniel had meant to fix for weeks. Maya looked at herself again. "Do you think this coat still looks all right?" she asked. Daniel glanced up. "Yes." "You didn't even look." "I did. For 1 second. That was enough." She exhaled. "You're impossible. You married me anyway." Her eyes met his in the mirror. For half a heartbeat, something softer passed between them. Something old, familiar, worn smooth by years. A memory of being younger, perhaps, when they had once walked through a university campus, holding takeaway coffee and speaking about the future as though it were a place that would naturally welcome them. Back then, Daniel had owned almost nothing. Maya had not seemed to mind. Or maybe neither of them had understood yet what life would ask in exchange for love. Ethan tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Are we late?" "Not yet." Maya picked up her handbag. "I need to go straight from lunch to Annika's." Daniel stood. "Still on for today?" "Yes. Just lunch and a bit of shopping." He nodded. He knew about Annika. University friend, elegant flat, marketing job. The kind of life that looked polished even in photographs taken carelessly. Maya had started seeing more of her recently. Daniel had no objection to the friendship. Why would he? Still, he had noticed that Maya often returned from those afternoons quieter than before. Not angry, not upset, simply difficult to reach. He opened the door, and the cold morning air came in at once. Ethan ran ahead toward the lift, boots thudding with exaggerated determination. Maya adjusted the sleeve of her coat and stepped into the corridor. Daniel locked the flat behind them. The school run took 12 minutes on foot, though Ethan's pace made it feel longer. He insisted on jumping over every crack in the pavement and saluting every dog that passed them. Maya walked beside Daniel in silence, one arm folded across herself against the cold. Rain hung in the air now, fine and drifting rather than heavy. At the crossing, Ethan took Daniel's hand automatically. Maya saw it. Something unreadable moved across her face again. It stayed there only a second. Outside the school gates, children clustered under umbrellas, while parents exchanged the same tired smiles and weather complaints that form the background music of ordinary adulthood. A woman in a camel coat waved to Maya. "Morning," she said brightly. "You look gorgeous, as usual." Maya thanked her with practiced ease. The woman's gaze shifted to Daniel, then back again. "Are you two coming to the fundraiser next Friday?" Daniel said. "If work doesn't keep me late." "It'll be nice," the woman said. Drinks, music, all a bit more civilized than the usual school chaos. "Maya, you must come. You always bring some glamour with you." The comment was harmless, probably meant kindly. Still, Daniel noticed the slight pause before the woman acknowledged him again. The small social calculations people made without thinking. Who was polished? Who belonged? Who merely accompanied? He was used to it. It no longer stung in any direct way. But when he glanced at Maya, he wondered whether she was used to it too, or whether she had begun, quietly, to resent it. Ethan ran off after a friend with only the briefest backward wave. Daniel watched him go, then turned to Maya. "I'll pick him up." She nodded. "Thanks." There was a beat of silence. Then, because he wanted to say something kind and ordinary before they separated, he asked, "What time will you be home?" "Not late." "How late is not late?" She gave him a look that was almost playful, but something guarded sat beneath it. "I don't know yet, Daniel." "All right." He meant to leave it there. Instead, he added gently, "Have a nice time." She looked at him then, properly looked at him. And for one strange moment, he had the feeling that she was standing very far away, even though she was only inches from him. "You too," she said. Then she turned and walked toward the main road, her heels measured against the wet pavement, coat moving softly around her legs. Daniel stood where he was for another second. There was nothing wrong. Nothing he could name. And yet, sometimes unease begins not as thought, but as instinct. A quiet resistance in the chest. A pause where certainty used to be. He pushed it aside. He had work. Emails. A 10 o'clock meeting. A report still unfinished. The practical architecture of a life does not stop because the emotional part feels briefly uncertain. So he went. By 9:30, Daniel was at his desk in the gray municipal building, where he had worked for nearly 11 years. The office was functional in the way all government buildings seem to be. Fluorescent lighting, faded carpet, desks arranged with a seriousness that no amount of personal mugs or potted plants could entirely soften. He did not dislike the work. That surprised some people. They assumed honest routine must always feel like resignation. But Daniel had inherited from his father a respect for steadiness, a belief that a decent life was built by showing up, doing the work properly, and not mistaking extravagance for success. His father had been a school caretaker in Sheffield, a man of very few words and unfashionable integrity. He had never earned much, but he had never owed anyone explanations either. "Live clean," he used to say. "Sleep easy." Daniel had tried. He still tried. But there were mornings now, more of them than before, when he wondered whether principles were easiest to admire in the people who did not have to share their consequences. Around 11, during a break between meetings, he checked his phone. One new message from Maya. "Lunch first, then shopping. Don't forget Ethan's library book." Daniel smiled faintly and typed back. "Already in his bag. Try not to buy the whole city." 3 dots appeared, then vanished. No reply came. He set the phone down. Across the desk, his colleague Martin leaned back in his chair and said, "You coming Friday?" "Where?" "The thing at Patel's. Drinks, too much food, people pretending they enjoy one another." Daniel looked up from his screen. Tempting description. Martin grinned. "Bring your wife. Last time she made the rest of us look like budget furniture." Daniel laughed despite himself. It was meant affectionately. Still, the phrasing stayed with him. He made everyone else look cheap. Beautiful women were often praised in ways that had very little to do with them as people. They were turned into atmosphere, decoration, comparison. Daniel had never wanted Maya to feel reduced by beauty, but he had often suspected that beauty had become, for her, a kind of burden no one else could quite see. An expectation. A promise life had made to her face and then failed to keep. At 1:30, in a restaurant across the city, Maya sat opposite Annika beneath warm pendant lighting and tried not to notice the ease of everything around her. The tableware matched. The waitstaff moved smoothly. The windows were tall enough to make the room feel generous. Even the flowers by the bar looked expensive, in a way she suspected they probably were. Annika was halfway through a story about Ibiza, laughing at something a man had said on a yacht neither of them had any reason to be on, when Maya's attention drifted to the woman seated 2 tables away. Cream coat, gold watch, hair that looked professionally effortless. There was nothing extraordinary about her, and somehow that was the point. She looked like someone to whom beauty and money had arrived at the same address and decided to remain. "Are you even listening?" Annika asked. Maya blinked. "Sorry, yes." "No, you're not." Annika smiled and lifted her glass. "What's wrong with you lately?" "Nothing." "That face means something." "What face?" "The one where you look like you're somewhere between boredom and a personal crisis." Maya laughed once under her breath. "That's dramatic." "I know you." Maya looked down at the menu she had already read twice. "I'm just tired." Annika studied her for a moment, then said more quietly, "Are things all right at home?" It was such a simple question, so ordinary. And for some reason, Maya found she could not answer immediately. Were things all right? Daniel was kind, reliable, thoughtful. Ethan adored him. Their home was safe. Their life, while modest, was stable. There were no betrayals to speak of, no cruelty, no scandal, no dramatic failures of character. And yet there were days when Maya felt as though she were standing just outside her own life, looking in at it through glass. She stirred her drink. "Daniel is Daniel." Annika raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." "It isn't. He's good." "But?" Maya gave a small, humorless smile. "Sometimes good feels very close to fixed." Annika leaned back in her chair. "That," she said, "is a dangerous sentence." Before Maya could respond, someone approached the table. "Am I interrupting?" The voice was male, low, and perfectly measured. Both women looked up. He was taller than Daniel, older by a few years perhaps, dressed in charcoal and navy with the kind of precision that did not appear accidental. There was nothing flashy about him. No loud cologne, no obvious performance. Just a contained sort of confidence, the kind that suggested he had long ago stopped needing rooms to approve of him. Annika smiled at once. "You're late." "I know." She turned to Maya. "This is Adrian Cole. He works with Amir." Adrian's gaze moved to Maya, not hurriedly, not boldly, but with complete attention. "Maya," Annika added. For a moment, nothing about his expression changed. Then he smiled, very slightly. "It's nice to finally meet you," he said. Maya frowned before she could stop herself. "Finally?" Annika laughed. "I've mentioned you." "Only good things, I hope," Adrian said, though he was still looking at Maya. There was no impropriety in it, nothing anyone could object to. And yet she felt, suddenly and inexplicably, more visible than she had all day. "You're very well spoken for someone walking into the middle of lunch," she said. One of his eyebrows lifted, just a fraction. That sounded like criticism. Observation. Those are often more dangerous. Annika made a delighted noise. "Oh, I like this already." Maya should have laughed. Instead, she felt something small and strange move beneath the surface of her composure. Not attraction. Not yet. Only awareness. The sort that arrives before reason has caught up. Adrian took the empty seat beside Annika after asking if he might join them. He spoke easily, but never too much. Asked questions that were specific enough to feel like interest, not politeness. When he addressed Maya, he did so with a curious steadiness that made interruption impossible. At one point, Annika mentioned university and old campus memories, and Adrian glanced at Maya before saying, "You strike me as someone who notices more than she says." Maya looked at him. "And you say that based on one lunch?" "Sometimes one lunch is enough." Annika laughed again. "You see why my brother likes him? Insufferably perceptive." Maya lowered her eyes to her glass, though she could still feel the after effect of the remark. It was an odd thing to say. More than that, it was an odd thing to get right. By the time lunch ended, the rain had stopped. The city outside looked freshly polished, as though it had been wiped clean. Annika stood first, reaching for her bag. "Come on. I need to return that dress I definitely should have bought in a smaller size." As Maya rose, Adrian stepped aside to make room. Then, quietly enough that Annika did not hear, he said, "Gray doesn't suit most people." Maya turned. "What?" He glanced at her coat. "It suits you." That was all. No smile this time. No obvious implication. Just a sentence, left behind with the ease of someone who understood exactly how long a few well-placed words could linger. Later, much later, Maya would think back to that moment and realize it had not felt significant at the time. That was precisely why it had been. Some moments do not look important while they are happening. They only reveal themselves in retrospect, once the damage has already begun. That evening, Daniel returned home with Ethan and found the flat half-lit and unusually quiet. "Mom home?" Ethan asked, dropping his school bag by the door. "Not yet." "Oh." There was disappointment in the word, though he tried to hide it. Daniel squeezed his shoulder. She'll be back soon. He hoped that was true. While Ethan changed out of his uniform, Daniel reheated the pasta from the fridge and set plates on the table. The domestic familiarity of it steadied him. Sauce warming in a pan, cutlery laid out, the radio on low. These things were dependable. They asked very little and gave a kind of structure in return. At 6:20, Maya came in. She looked beautiful in the way she always did after spending time among polished spaces. Not because the spaces changed her, exactly, but because they reminded her of a version of herself she seemed to prefer. "You're late," Daniel said, though not accusingly. "Traffic," she replied, setting her bag down. Ethan ran to her. "Mom." She bent to kiss the top of his head, distracted but affectionate. "Hi, darling." Daniel watched her remove her coat. There was a shopping bag on her arm he had not seen before. Small, elegant, definitely expensive. "What did you get?" he asked. "Nothing major." Ethan peered into the bag. "Is it for me?" "No." He accepted that with surprising dignity and returned to the table. Over dinner, Ethan explained that Oliver the classroom snail had improved emotionally and was now exploring boundaries. Maya laughed in the right places. Daniel listened. On the surface, everything was normal. And yet, he had the peculiar sense of sitting beside a closed door. Not a locked one, just one that had once stood open and no longer did. After Ethan was in bed, Daniel found Maya in the living room, scrolling through her phone. The lamp beside the sofa cast a warm circle of light over her face, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. He sat at the other end of the sofa. "Good lunch?" "It was fine." "Just fine?" She shrugged. "Nice place. Good food." He waited. Something in him had expected more. Some anecdote, some detail, some version of the easy conversation they used to have before silence started doing more of the work. Instead, she said, "Anika's life is very different." Daniel looked at her. "Different how?" She gave a short laugh. "Daniel." "What?" "You know how." He did know. Or thought he did. "Does it bother you?" he asked. Maya did not answer immediately. She set the phone screen down on the cushion beside her and leaned back. "It bothers me that everything feels difficult all the time," she said at last. "That every plan needs budgeting. Every outing needs thinking through. Every little thing has to wait." Daniel looked down at his hands. "I'm trying." "I know you are." The words were not sharp. That made them worse. Because there it was again. That quiet disappointment, stripped of blame and therefore impossible to defend against. He spoke carefully. "We're not doing badly, Maya." "No," she said. "We're just always doing carefully." Rain tapped softly against the window again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel said, "Is this about lunch?" It's about life. He turned to look at her properly. She was tired, beautiful, distant, somehow both near and unreachable. He wanted, suddenly and powerfully, to close whatever gap had opened between them, to say the right thing, to become, in one perfect sentence, everything she needed him to be. But some distances are not crossed through language. Some are built from years. "I can do better," he said quietly. Maya closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, there was something like sadness there, or guilt, or maybe simply exhaustion. "That's the problem," she said. "You always think this is about effort." Daniel frowned slightly. What else would it be about? She looked at him for so long that he thought she might answer. Instead, she reached for her phone again and stood. "I'm tired," she said. "I'm going to bed." And just like that, the conversation ended not with conflict, but with absence. Daniel remained where he was. The room felt strangely still once she had gone. On the coffee table lay Ethan's library book, one of Maya's earrings, and a supermarket receipt folded into itself. The ordinary leftovers of an ordinary evening. He leaned back and listened to the rain. There are nights when a life looks intact from the outside, and yet something beneath it has already started to shift. Not break, not collapse, just move, quietly, under the surface. The first crack is rarely visible. It is felt. And though Daniel could not have explained why, he sat there for a long time, with the unmistakable sense that something had changed that day. Upstairs, Maya stood by the bedroom window in the dark, looking at her own faint reflection in the glass. The city beyond it blurred under rain and streetlight. Her phone lit up in her hand. A new message. From an unknown number. "Gray really did suit you." She stared at the screen. Then, after a moment too long to be innocent, she locked the phone and set it face down on the bedside table. But she did not sleep easily, because some attention feels flattering only at first. After that, it becomes dangerous. There are moments that seem insignificant while they are happening. A sentence, a glance, a message that could have been ignored. They do not arrive with warning. And yet, later, when everything has shifted, they stand out with uncomfortable clarity, as though they had always intended to matter. Maya told herself it meant nothing. The message from the night before, simple, almost harmless, had stayed with her longer than it should have. Not because of what it said, but because of how precisely it had been placed. Gray really did suit you. No name. No explanation. No invitation. Just recognition. She had woken with it still faintly present in her mind, like the aftertaste of something she had not meant to enjoy. The morning unfolded as it always did. Daniel in the kitchen. Ethan arguing with his shoelaces. The low hum of routine wrapping itself around them with quiet efficiency. If anything, Maya was softer that day, more attentive. She helped Ethan button his shirt without being asked. She even laughed when Daniel burned the first slice of toast and tried, unsuccessfully, to hide it. It surprised him. He noticed, of course. He always noticed. "You're in a good mood," he said, watching her from across the table. "Am I not allowed to be?" she replied lightly. "You are. It's just new." She held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. "Maybe I slept well." Daniel nodded, accepting the answer. He wanted to ask more. He didn't. There are questions that seem small, but carry the risk of becoming something else entirely once spoken aloud. Instead, he reached for Ethan's lunchbox and checked its contents with quiet thoroughness. Maya watched him. There was something about Daniel that had always been steady. Not exciting, not unpredictable, but dependable in a way that made the rest of the world feel less chaotic. Once, she had loved that about him without question. Now, she wasn't sure what she felt. Not dislike. Never that. Just distance. As though she were standing a few steps away from a life she still technically belonged to. Ethan finished his cereal and looked between them. "Are we going to the aquarium this weekend?" Daniel smiled. "That's the plan." "Promise?" "Promise." Ethan turned to Maya. "You're coming too, right?" The question lingered longer than it should have. Maya hesitated, just briefly. Daniel noticed. Ethan did not. "Of course," she said finally, brushing a crumb from his sleeve. "I wouldn't miss it." The answer satisfied him. Daniel, however, felt that same quiet resistance in his chest again, the one he had ignored the day before. He pushed it aside. It was too early in the morning to question things that had no clear shape. By mid-morning, the city had settled into its usual rhythm. Cars moving with purpose. People stepping in and out of offices with the practiced urgency of those who had learned to measure their days in obligations. Maya stood outside a glass-fronted building in the city center, her reflection faintly visible in the doors. She checked the time. 10 minutes early. She could leave. There was still enough space to pretend she had simply passed by. Instead, she stepped inside. The reception area was quiet, elegant without being excessive. Neutral tones, soft lighting. The kind of place designed to feel expensive without needing to prove it. A woman at the desk looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Mr. Cole." The woman nodded as though this was entirely expected. "Of course. Take a seat." Maya sat. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. She had told herself this was practical. Nothing more. A conversation about a job opportunity. A favor through Annika's network. normal, professional. And yet, beneath that reasoning, something else lingered. Curiosity. That was all. Just curiosity. A few minutes later, Adrian appeared. He did not rush. He never seemed to rush. "Right on time," he said, stopping in front of her. Maya stood. "I didn't want to be late." "Most people don't want to be," he replied. "They just are." There was the faintest suggestion of humor in his tone. It unsettled her slightly. "Come through," he said, gesturing toward the corridor. His office overlooked the street below. Large windows, clean desk. Nothing unnecessary. It was the kind of space that suggested control, not only over environment, but over self. "Sit," he said. Maya did. He remained standing for a moment, studying something on the desk before turning back to her. "You didn't have to come in today," he said. "I could have sent details over email." "Then why didn't you?" He looked at her then, properly. "Because some things are easier to explain in person." There was no obvious implication in the sentence, and yet it did not feel entirely neutral. Maya held his gaze. "Then explain." A corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile. "I like clarity," he said, "so I'll be direct. The role is straightforward, client-facing, coordination, a bit of admin. Nothing you couldn't manage." "And the salary?" she asked. "It's competitive." "That's vague." "It's generous," he corrected. Maya leaned back slightly. "For someone with my experience?" "Yes." "Why?" Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved toward the window, hands resting lightly against the edge of the desk. "Because," he said after a moment, "I think you're underused." The words settled in the space between them. Maya felt something shift again. That same quiet awareness from the day before, now clearer, more defined. "Underused," she repeated. "You pay attention," he said. "You think before you speak. You hold yourself well. Most people don't notice those things. I do." It was not a compliment in the obvious sense. It was more precise than that. More deliberate. Maya looked down at her hands. For a brief moment, she thought of Daniel, of the way he noticed her preferences, her routines, the small domestic details that formed the structure of their life. That was a kind of attention too. Just a different one. "I'd need to think about it," she said. "Of course." "No pressure?" "None." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "But don't take too long. Opportunities tend not to wait." Maya nodded. She stood. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For the offer." "For noticing you?" he said lightly. She met his eyes again. There it was, that edge. Not enough to accuse, just enough to feel. She left without answering. Outside, the air felt colder, sharper, as though something had shifted, not only in circumstance, but in perception. She walked without direction for a few minutes, letting the noise of the street fill the space in her thoughts. Underused. The word repeated itself. It should not have mattered. And yet, sometimes it takes only one sentence, spoken at the right moment, to give shape to a feeling that has been quietly waiting for permission. By the time she reached the main road, her phone buzzed. A message. From Daniel. "How's your day?" She stared at it for a second, then typed, "Fine. Just running a few errands." She hesitated, then added, "How's yours?" A minute later, "Same as always. Quiet. Missing you." Maya read the message twice. It was simple, sincere, exactly what Daniel would say. And for reasons she could not fully explain, it made her feel both comforted and unsettled. She slipped the phone back into her bag. Across the city, Daniel sat at his desk, unaware of the conversation that had just taken place, unaware of the word that had been placed, carefully and deliberately, into his wife's mind, unaware that something so small could carry so much weight. He focused on his work, moving through reports and figures with practiced ease. There was stability in numbers, predictability, cause and effect. If this, then that. Life, he had always believed, followed similar rules. Effort led to progress. Consistency led to security. Love, if given fully, led to permanence. It was a comforting structure. And like many comforting structures, it was only true until it wasn't. That evening, the flat felt smaller than usual. Not physically. Nothing had changed. And yet the air seemed tighter, the silence more noticeable. Maya returned later than she had planned. Daniel was in the living room, laptop open, though he was not really working. Ethan sat on the floor with his books, tracing letters with exaggerated concentration. "You're back," Daniel said, closing the laptop. "Yes." "How was it?" "Fine." The same word. Again. He nodded. "Did you decide anything about the job?" Maya paused. There it was. The moment. Small. Ordinary. A question like any other. And yet, something in it felt like a line. She could tell him everything. The office. The offer. The way Adrian had looked at her. Not inappropriately, but not entirely neutrally either. Or she could simplify. "I'm thinking about it," she said. Daniel studied her face for a second. "Do you want it?" "I don't know yet." "Okay." He meant it. He did not push. That had always been one of his strengths. And, increasingly, something else. Maya moved toward Ethan. Homework done? Almost. She sat beside him, brushing his hair back gently. Daniel watched them. For a moment, everything looked exactly as it should. A family. A home. A life that, from the outside, would have seemed perfectly intact. And yet, there are times when nothing is visibly wrong, and still something is no longer right. Not broken, not lost, just shifting. Slowly, quietly, almost politely. Later that night, after Ethan was asleep and the lights were off, Maya lay awake staring at the ceiling. Daniel slept beside her, his breathing steady, familiar. She turned slightly, looking at him in the dim light. He looked the same. Of course he did. People do not change overnight. Lives do not collapse in a day. Everything remains, for a while, exactly as it was. Except for the part that doesn't. Her phone lay on the bedside table. She reached for it, hesitated, then unlocked the screen. No new messages. She stared at it for a moment longer than necessary, then set it down again, closed her eyes, and tried, unsuccessfully, to return to the version of herself that had once believed this life was enough. There is a point, difficult to define, easy to miss, where curiosity begins to resemble choice. Not a decision. Not yet. Just a subtle leaning. A willingness to return to something you could have left alone. Maya told herself she was being practical. The job made sense. Better hours. Better pay. A different environment. One that did not feel as though it required constant adjustment just to belong. There was nothing wrong with wanting that. Nothing unreasonable. And yet, as she stood in front of her wardrobe that morning, her fingers moving slowly between fabrics she had worn too many times, she knew the decision was not entirely about work. Some part of it was about being seen. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's mother, but as herself. She chose a coat she rarely wore, something softer in color, more deliberate. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she changed her earrings. It was a small thing, but it felt intentional. In the kitchen, Daniel was already up. "You're early," he said, glancing at the clock. "So are you." "I'm always early." "That's because you like control." He smiled faintly. "That's because I don't like being late." Maya poured herself tea. There was an ease between them that morning, but it was not the same ease as before. It felt managed, as though both of them were choosing their words more carefully than necessary. Ethan shuffled in, still half asleep, and leaned against Daniel again. "Boots today?" Daniel asked. Ethan nodded. Obviously. Maya watched them. For a brief moment, something tightened in her chest. This quiet, ordinary affection was something she understood, something she belonged to. And yet, it no longer felt sufficient. The thought came uninvited. She did not push it away. Daniel noticed her watching. "What?" he asked. "Nothing." "You're thinking something." "I'm always thinking something." "Should I be concerned?" She almost said yes. Instead, she shook her head. No. The lie was small. That made it easier. By 9:30, she was back in Adrian's office. This time, she did not hesitate at the entrance. The receptionist greeted her with familiarity. That, too, felt like something. Adrian was already inside when she entered. "You decided quickly," he said. "Is that a problem?" "No," he replied. "It's efficient." Maya remained standing for a moment. "I'll take the role." He nodded once, as though confirming something he had already anticipated. Good. No surprise, no celebration, just certainty. It unsettled her slightly. "You were sure I would?" she asked. "I thought you might." "And if I hadn't?" He stepped closer, not too close, just enough to shift the space between them. "Then I would have been wrong," he said calmly. "It happens." Maya held his gaze. There was something about him that made ordinary interactions feel measured, intentional, as though nothing he said existed without purpose. "When do I start?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if you like." "That soon?" "My wait." She nodded. "Yes." "Why wait?" The answer seemed simple. It should have been. That evening, the conversation at home unfolded exactly as Maya had expected, and yet not at all as she had hoped. "I got the job," she said, setting her bag down. Daniel looked up from the table. "Already?" "They wanted a quick start." "And you said yes." It wasn't a question. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "What kind of role is it?" "Client coordination. Some admin. It's flexible." "And the hours?" "Normal." "And the pay?" She hesitated. Then, "Good." Daniel leaned back slightly. "That's vague." "Does it matter?" He held her gaze. "It does if it changes things." "It won't." Another small lie. Or perhaps not yet a lie. Just incomplete. Ethan looked between them, sensing something he could not name. "Is Mom working now?" he asked. Maya smiled at him. "Yes." "Does that mean more money?" Daniel laughed softly. Straight to the point. Ethan shrugged. I like money. So do we all, Maya said, though her tone was quieter than intended. Dinner continued. Conversation moved around safer topics: school, work, the aquarium, still planned for the weekend. And yet, beneath it all, something had shifted. Daniel felt it. He just couldn't define it. Later that night, he stood in the kitchen alone, rinsing dishes under warm water. The repetition should have been calming. It wasn't. Maya had moved around the flat with a kind of quiet energy he had not seen in a long time. Not happiness exactly. Something sharper, more focused. He dried his hands and leaned against the counter. For a moment, he considered asking her directly. About Adrian, about the job, about the feeling, persistent now, that something was moving just beyond his reach. But questions, once asked, cannot be taken back. And answers, once given, cannot be unheard. So he remained silent. Upstairs, Maya stood before the mirror again. The same mirror, the same reflection. And yet, she saw herself differently. Not because she had changed, but because something in her had been acknowledged, underused. The word returned. She traced the edge of her earring with her fingers. Tomorrow she would step into a different version of her life. Not entirely different, just slightly shifted. And sometimes that is all it takes. Across the city, Adrian sat in his apartment, a glass of something untouched on the table beside him. His phone lay face up, no messages. He did not expect one. He rarely expected things. He preferred to understand them. Maya had accepted the role. Of course she had. Not because of him. Not entirely. Because the timing had been right. Because the dissatisfaction had already been there. He had simply recognized it. And recognition, when done correctly, is far more effective than persuasion. He picked up his glass, then set it down again without drinking. Some people needed to be chased. Others only needed to be understood. Maya, he had realized, belonged firmly to the second category. And those were always the more interesting ones. Back in the flat, Daniel turned off the kitchen light and stood for a moment in the dark, listening. The house was quiet. Maya in the bedroom. Ethan asleep. Everything where it should be. And yet, there it was again. That feeling. Not loud, not urgent, just present. Like a question without words. He walked upstairs, slipped into bed beside Maya. She shifted slightly, but did not wake. He lay there, staring into the darkness. And for the first time in a long while, a thought crossed his mind that he could not easily dismiss. Not fear, not suspicion, just something quieter, something more difficult to ignore. A sense that the life he trusted so completely was no longer entirely his to understand. There are changes that announce themselves, and then there are the ones that do not. They arrive without sound, slipping into routine, adjusting themselves into the ordinary until what was once unfamiliar begins to feel expected. By the end of her first week, Maya had learned the rhythm of the office. It was different from anything she had known before. Not louder, not busier, just smoother. People spoke with intention, moved with quiet efficiency. Nothing felt rushed, and yet everything was done. There was no visible struggle, no constant negotiation with time, money, or limitation. Things simply worked. And Maya realized, slowly, how much of her life until now had been built around things that didn't. She adjusted quickly, faster than she expected, faster than Daniel noticed. At home, very little appeared to change. Breakfast still happened. Ethan still argued about shoes. Daniel still left early and returned with the same tired steadiness that had always defined him. But something small had shifted in Maya's presence. She spoke a little less, listened a little differently, and carried herself with a kind of quiet awareness that had not been there before. Daniel noticed it in fragments. The way she checked her phone, not constantly, but carefully. The way she paused before answering simple questions. The way her attention seemed divided. Not absent, just elsewhere. At first, he told himself it was the new job. Adjustment. Change always came with a certain distance. That was normal. Still, normal things do not usually feel this unfamiliar. At the office, Maya was becoming something else. Not someone new, just more defined. She understood quickly what was expected of her. More importantly, she understood how to present herself in a way that made expectations irrelevant. There was a confidence in her now that did not come from certainty, but from awareness. She watched, listened, adjusted. And in doing so, she began to belong. Adrian noticed. Of course he did. You adapt quickly, he said one afternoon, standing beside her desk. I pay attention, she replied. That's not the same thing. It is when you know what to look for. He studied her for a moment. Then quietly, and what are you looking for? Maya did not answer immediately. She turned slightly in her chair, meeting his gaze. Something that doesn't feel temporary. The words surprised even her. Adrian did not react. Not outwardly. But something in his expression shifted. Subtly, almost imperceptibly. Most things are, he said. Not everything. No, he agreed. Not everything. A pause. Then he added, but the things that aren't usually come at a cost. Maya held his gaze. There it was again. That edge. Not pressure. Not invitation. Just understanding. And something else. Something that felt dangerously close to alignment. That evening, Daniel arrived home earlier than usual. It was not planned. A meeting had been canceled, and for once, he had decided not to fill the space with more work. Instead, he walked home. The air was cool, the streets familiar. There was something grounding about moving through the same paths he had taken for years. Unchanged, predictable, reliable. Unlike people. When he opened the door, the flat was quiet. Too quiet. "Maya?" he called. No answer. He checked the time. 6:20. Later than usual. He moved into the kitchen, set his keys down, and glanced at the table. No plates. No sign of dinner. Ethan's school bag lay near the door, slightly open. Daniel frowned. A moment later, he heard the bedroom door open. Ethan appeared, still in his uniform. "Dad?" "Hey," Daniel said quickly, crossing the room. "You're not changed." "Mom said she'd be back soon." "How long have you been home?" Ethan shrugged. "A while." Daniel crouched slightly. "Did you eat anything?" "No." Something tightened in Daniel's chest. "All right," he said calmly. "Let's fix that." He moved quickly now. Too quickly. Fridge. Bread. Cheese. Something simple. Routine. Control. But beneath it, unease. He checked his phone. No message. That was unusual. Not alarming. Just unusual. He typed, "Are you on your way?" The reply came 5 minutes later. "Still at work. Got held up. Sorry." Daniel read it. Once. Then again. He looked at the time. 6:30. He glanced at Ethan, now sitting quietly at the table, watching him with the kind of silent patience children develop when they sense something isn't quite right. "It's fine," Daniel said, more to himself than to anyone else. "She's working." Ethan nodded. He accepted things easily. Too easily. That, Daniel thought suddenly, might not be a good thing. Maya left the office at 7. Later than she had intended. Later than she had needed to. The conversation had gone on longer than necessary. It had not been work. Not exactly. She stepped out into the evening air, her thoughts still half inside the room she had just left. Adrian's voice lingered. Not in words, but in tone. Measured. Controlled. Certain. He had a way of speaking that made things feel deliberate, as though nothing was accidental, as though every silence meant something. Maya walked slowly toward the main road. She should have felt guilty. Maybe she did. Just not enough. Not yet. Because the truth The uncomfortable, unspoken truth was this: she had not stayed because she had to. She had stayed because she wanted to. The realization settled in quietly. No shock, no panic, just clarity. And clarity, sometimes, is more dangerous than confusion. Her phone buzzed. Daniel. She had already replied. Still, she typed again. Leaving now. A pause. Then, traffic might be bad. Another small lie. Or maybe just unnecessary detail. She slipped the phone into her bag. Back at home, dinner was finished. Simple. Quiet. Ethan spoke about school. Daniel listened. Asked questions. Responded in all the right places. But his attention was divided. Not visibly. Not obviously. Just enough. By the time Maya walked in, the dishes were done. The kitchen was clean. Everything in place. She paused in the doorway for a moment. Daniel looked up. You're late. His tone was neutral. That was worse than anger. I said I would be. You said you were leaving. I was. A pause. Neither of them raised their voice. Neither of them moved closer. The distance between them remained exactly the same. And yet, it felt larger. I fed Ethan, Daniel said. Thank you. Another pause. Ethan looked between them. Can I watch TV? He asked carefully. Yes, Maya said quickly. Just one episode, Daniel added. Ethan disappeared into the living room. Silence returned. Maya placed her bag down slowly. I didn't realize it was this late. Daniel nodded. Then, after a moment, you could have told me earlier. I did. Not really. She exhaled, just slightly. It's a new job, Daniel. Things take time. I understand that. Do you? The question landed quietly, but it stayed. Daniel looked at her. Really looked this time. Not at her face. Not at her clothes. At her. And for the first time, he saw it clearly. Not change. Not yet. But direction. A movement away from something. From him. I'm trying to, he said. Maya held his gaze, then looked away first. I'm tired, she said again. The same sentence, the same ending. But this time, it did not feel like exhaustion. It felt like avoidance. That night, they lay in the same bed, closer than strangers, further than before. Daniel did not sleep immediately. He watched the ceiling in the dark, listening to the quiet rhythm of the room. Maya beside him, present, and yet not entirely there. There is a moment in every relationship when uncertainty becomes awareness. Not loud, not confirmed, just undeniable. Daniel did not know what had changed. Not fully. But for the first time, he knew something had. And somewhere, beneath the quiet surface of everything he trusted, a question had begun to form. Not yet spoken, not yet understood, but there, waiting. There is a difference between attention and intention. Attention can be accidental, momentary, easily dismissed. But intention lingers. It returns. It learns your patterns. And eventually, it stops feeling like coincidence. By the second week, Maya no longer felt new. She moved through the office with a quiet familiarity now, no longer observing everything, but participating in it. Conversations came easier. Decisions required less hesitation. Even her posture had changed, though she had not consciously noticed it. She belonged. Or at least, she felt closer to belonging than she had in a long time. That feeling was intoxicating. Not overwhelming. Just enough to notice. Just enough to want to keep. It began, as most things do, with something small. "Stay a little longer," Adrian said one evening, glancing up from a file. "There's something I want your opinion on." It was nearly 6. Maya checked the time. "I should head home." "You can," he said easily. "This can wait." A pause. Then softer. "Unless you don't want it to." She looked at him. There was no pressure in his voice. No expectation. Just space. And somehow, that made the choice feel entirely hers. "I'll stay 10 minutes," she said. Adrian nodded once. "That's enough." The office grew quieter as people left. Lights dimmed. Voices disappeared. What remained was softer, more contained. Maya sat across from him, reviewing documents she barely registered. Her attention was divided. Not by distraction, but by awareness. Adrian worked with the same controlled focus he always had. He did not look at her often, did not fill the silence unnecessarily. And yet, his presence felt deliberate, as though it existed not just in the room, but in the space between them. At one point, he leaned back slightly, studying her. "You're thinking too much," he said. She looked up. "About work?" "No." "Then what?" He held her gaze. "You tell me." Maya felt it then, that quiet shift. Not sudden, not overwhelming, just unmistakable. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that I should go." "Then go." He didn't stop her, didn't move, didn't say anything else. And that, more than anything, made her hesitate. Because there is something unsettling about someone who does not try to keep you. Someone who assumes you might stay anyway. She stood, picked up her bag, walked to the door, and for a moment, just a moment, she almost turned back. At home, Daniel had already set the table. Dinner was ready. Ethan sat with his homework, tapping his pencil against the page in quiet frustration. "Mom," he said as she entered, "I don't understand this word." Maya walked over automatically. "What word?" "Responsibility." She paused, then smiled faintly. "That's a big one. What does it mean?" Maya looked at the page, then at him. "It means doing what you're supposed to do, even if you don't want to." "Yes." Ethan considered that. "That sounds annoying." Daniel laughed softly from the kitchen. "It is." Maya didn't laugh. She remained still for a moment longer than necessary, then sat down beside Ethan. "Let's sound it out," she said. Dinner passed quietly. Not tense, not warm, just measured. Daniel watched her more now. Not obviously, but carefully. He noticed the way she seemed slightly distracted, the way her answers came a fraction too late, the way her phone remained face down on the table, as though placed there with intention. Not to hide, but not to invite. "What time did you finish?" he asked. "Later than planned." "Again?" "It's temporary." "Is it?" She met his eyes. There it was. Not conflict, but resistance. "I said it was," she replied. Daniel nodded. He did not push further, but something inside him tightened. Because certainty, once shared, was now being replaced by something else. Something less stable. Later that night, after Ethan was asleep, Maya stood in the kitchen alone. The lights were off except for the small one above the sink. The flat felt different at night. Quieter. More honest. She poured herself water, took a sip, set the glass down. And then, without fully thinking, she reached for her phone, unlocked it, scrolled. Nothing new. She stared at the screen for a moment, then locked it again. Exhaled. And yet, she did not put it down, because anticipation is a strange thing. It does not always need a reason, only a possibility. Across the city, Adrian sat at his desk, reviewing something he had already finished. His phone lay untouched beside him. He knew better than to reach too soon. Timing mattered. Always. People were most vulnerable not when they were pursued, but when they were left to consider their own choices. He had seen it before, many times. The pause between decision and action. That was where everything happened. He checked the time. Not yet. Back in the flat, Maya finally placed her phone on the counter, stepped away, told herself this was nothing. Just work. Just conversation. Just attention. Nothing more. And yet, there it was again. That quiet pull. Not toward him. Not entirely. But toward something she could not yet name. Something that felt different. When Daniel came into the kitchen, she turned quickly. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "No." "Work?" "Maybe." He nodded. Walked closer. Not too close. Just enough. "You don't have to carry everything alone," he said gently. Maya looked at him. There was kindness in his face. Familiarity. History. Everything that had once been enough. And for a moment, just a moment, she felt something close to guilt. "I'm not," she said. Another lie. Small. Easy. Almost invisible. Daniel studied her, then nodded. "All right." He turned off the light, and together they walked back toward the bedroom. Side by side, close enough to touch, and yet not quite reaching. There are lines that exist clearly, and then there are the ones that do not. The ones you do not step across all at once, but move toward slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you are no longer standing where you used to be. And by then, turning back no longer feels simple. There is a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when something stops being occasional and becomes expected. You don't mark it, you don't name it, but you feel it, in the way absence suddenly becomes noticeable. Maya did not realize when it happened, not exactly. Only that, by the middle of the week, there were parts of her day that seemed incomplete without him. Not large parts, not important ones, just moments. A pause before speaking. A thought she did not finish. A silence that felt like it was waiting for something. Or someone. It began with conversation. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing that could be questioned. Just more frequent, more specific, more personal. Adrian had a way of asking things that felt less like questions and more like observations waiting to be confirmed. "You don't like small talk," he said once. Maya looked up from her desk. "I tolerate it." "You avoid it." "I manage it." He nodded slightly. "That sounds exhausting." She almost smiled. It can be. A pause. Then, "You weren't like that before, were you?" The question lingered. Maya leaned back in her chair. "Before what?" "Before you learned to adjust." Something in her expression shifted. "People change." "Do they?" She held his gaze. "Yes." Adrian studied her quietly. Then, softly, "Or do they just become more honest about what they've always wanted?" The sentence stayed, long after the conversation ended. At home, the changes were smaller, harder to define, but no less real. Maya began checking her phone more often. Not openly, not constantly, just carefully. Between tasks, between sentences, between moments. Daniel noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything. The way her attention drifted. The way she seemed present, but not fully engaged. The way her responses came just slightly out of rhythm. Not wrong, just delayed. And delay in something once immediate is always significant. "Everything all right?" he asked one evening. Maya looked up from her phone. "Yes." "You seem distracted." "I'm just tired." The same answer, again. Daniel nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand that tired no longer meant what it used to. It was not exhaustion. It was distance. That night, while Maya was in the shower, her phone buzzed. It was not unusual. It should not have mattered. Daniel did not intend to look. He didn't. Not immediately. He stood in the bedroom, folding Ethan's clothes, listening to the sound of water behind the door. The phone buzzed again, then stopped. Silence returned. And yet, something in that silence felt louder than before. Daniel glanced at the bedside table. The screen was dark. He looked away, picked up a shirt, folded it, set it down, waited. And then, almost without realizing it, he looked again. Not to read, not to search, just to see. The screen lit up. One message. No name saved. "You left early today." Daniel stared at it. Just long enough to understand. Not long enough to act. He stepped back, turned away. By the time Maya returned, towel wrapped loosely around her shoulders, the phone was exactly where it had been, untouched. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, calm, still, too still. "You're quiet," she said. "Am I?" "Yes. Just thinking." "About?" He met her eyes. For a moment, just a moment, he considered asking, saying the words out loud, forcing the uncertainty into something clear. But clarity is not always what people want. Not when it risks confirming something they are not ready to face. "Work," he said. Maya nodded. She believed him. Because it was easier. because they both needed it to be. The next day, Maya stayed again. This time she did not check the clock, did not justify it, did not pretend it was necessary. They spoke less about work, more about things that did not belong to either of them directly. Life, choices, expectations. At one point, Adrian asked, "Are you happy?" Maya did not answer immediately. The question was simple. Too simple. "Yes," she said finally. He tilted his head slightly. That sounded practiced. She exhaled. "You ask very direct questions. I prefer honest answers. Honesty is complicated. Only when you're avoiding it." The words landed quietly, but they stayed. Maya looked at him, then away. "I have a good life," she said. "That's not what I asked." Silence. And in that silence, something shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, just enough. That evening, she did not message Daniel when she left. Not immediately. Not because she forgot, but because it no longer felt necessary. That was the change. Not the action, but the absence of instinct. At home, Daniel waited. Dinner prepared. Table set. Ethan already asking questions. "Is Mom late again?" "She'll be here." "Soon?" Daniel paused, then nodded. "Soon." He no longer checked the time. Because time, in moments like these, does not offer comfort. It only confirms what you already feel. When Maya finally arrived, something in the air had already settled. Not tension, not anger, just awareness. Daniel looked at her. Not the way he used to. Not with easy certainty, but with something more careful, more measured. "Long day?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded. Nothing more. And that, more than anything, felt different. Later that night, Maya lay awake again. The room was dark. Daniel beside her. Still. Silent. She turned slightly, watching him. There was something about him now. Something she could not ignore. Not change. Not exactly. Just distance. But this time, it was not hers alone. And for the first time, she realized something she had not allowed herself to consider before. Distance does not belong to one person. It grows between. Across the city, Adrian stood by his window, looking out over the quiet lights. He did not need to check his phone. He already knew. The shift had happened. Not fully, not irreversibly, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to continue. because the most significant changes in a person's life rarely come from force. They come from recognition. And once someone begins to recognize what they are missing, it is only a matter of time before they begin to move toward it. Back in the dark room, Daniel closed his eyes. But sleep did not come easily. Because there are moments, quiet, unspoken moments, when you realize that something important is happening, and you are the last one to fully understand it. There is a moment in every unraveling when uncertainty ends. Not because everything becomes clear, but because something inside you stops asking, stops hoping, stops waiting for an explanation that will make things feel normal again. And in that stillness, you understand. Daniel did not confront her. Not immediately. He did not raise his voice. Did not search her phone. Did not ask questions he was no longer sure he wanted answered. Instead, he watched. Quietly. Carefully. As though observing something fragile that might collapse under the wrong movement. Because sometimes, the truth is not something you discover. It is something that reveals itself. In patterns. In absence. In the space between words. It was Saturday. The aquarium trip. Ethan had been waiting for it all week. Daniel had planned it carefully. Tickets booked. Timings checked. Even a small cafe nearby he thought Maya might like. It mattered to him. More than it should have. Because somewhere, beneath everything else, he still believed that small moments could repair larger things. That presence could close distance. That if they just spent time together, properly, intentionally, something might return. Maya stood by the mirror again. Different coat this time. Different earrings. She checked her phone. No message. She told herself that was good. Better. Simpler. Are you ready? Daniel asked from the hallway. In a minute. Ethan ran past her, already wearing his boots. I want to see the sharks first, he announced. Of course you do, Daniel said. Maya smiled faintly. She should have felt present. She should have felt part of this. Instead, she felt divided, as though part of her had already stepped somewhere else. The aquarium was crowded. Children pressed against glass panels, pointing at slow-moving creatures that seemed unaware of the attention they received. Ethan was mesmerized. Daniel watched him with quiet affection, explaining things he half remembered from somewhere. Maya walked beside them, present, smiling when needed, responding at the right moments. And yet, there was a distance in her attention. Subtle, but constant. At one point, Daniel reached for her hand. Instinct. Habit. Something they had done countless times before. For a second, she didn't respond. Then she let him hold it. But her hand remained still. Not tense. Not warm. just there. Daniel felt it immediately. That absence. Not rejection, but lack. And somehow, that felt worse. They sat at the cafe afterward. Ethan talking, Daniel listening, Maya glancing occasionally at her phone. Not openly, not obviously, just enough. Daniel noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed. Are you expecting something? He asked. Maya looked up. What? You keep checking your phone. I don't. You do. A pause. Then, it's nothing, she said. Daniel held her gaze. For a moment, the noise of the cafe seemed to fade. What is it? He asked quietly. Maya exhaled. I told you, it's nothing. He nodded slowly, but something inside him had already shifted, because there are moments when denial stops being convincing, even to the person offering it. That evening, the distance between them felt heavier, more defined, less deniable. Ethan fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day. Daniel remained in the living room, lights low, silence steady. Maya stood by the window, looking out, not really seeing. There was something in her posture now, not hesitation, not confusion, something closer to decision. Who is he? Daniel asked. The words came quietly, but they did not need volume. They carried enough weight on their own. Maya did not turn immediately. For a moment, just a moment, she considered denying it, continuing, keeping things where they were, uncertain. Undefined, safe, but something in Daniel's voice had changed. Not anger, not accusation, just clarity, and clarity is difficult to escape. She turned slowly. There's no one, she said. The lie felt different this time. He heard it immediately, not because of the words, but because of the space around them. I'm not asking what you want me to believe, Daniel said. I'm asking what's true. Silence. Longer now. He watched her, not impatiently, not desperately, just waiting. And that waiting, that calm, steady expectation, made it harder than anger would have been, harder than accusation, because anger could be resisted. This required honesty. I met someone, she said finally. The sentence was simple, too simple, and yet it carried everything. Daniel nodded once, as though confirming something he had already understood. At work? He asked. Yes. And? She hesitated, because this was the moment, the one that could still be softened, adjusted, framed differently. But honesty, once begun, has a way of continuing. I feel different around him, she said. Daniel looked at her, not shocked, not broken, just still. What does that mean? It means, she struggled slightly, I feel seen. The word lingered. Daniel's expression shifted, not dramatically, just enough. And you don't feel that with me? He asked. Maya's voice softened. It's not the same. Not the same. Such a small sentence. Such a complete one. Daniel looked down for a moment, then back at her. Have you done anything? He asked. She shook her head. No. He believed her. That wasn't the point. Do you want to? He asked. Silence. This time, she did not answer. She didn't need to. Something settled in Daniel then. Not anger. Not grief. Something quieter. More final. Understanding. Because there are questions you ask hoping to be wrong, and answers that arrive without needing to be spoken. He stood, walked past her, stopped near the doorway. "I think," he said calmly, "you've already left." Maya's breath caught slightly. "That's not fair." He turned. There was no accusation in his face, no bitterness, just clarity. "It is," he said. "It just doesn't feel like it yet." She looked at him. For a moment, just a moment, something like doubt passed through her. But it didn't stay. Because clarity works both ways. "I can't keep living like this," she said. Daniel nodded slowly. "I know." The words surprised her. "You do?" "Yes." A pause. Then, "If you've already made your decision, I won't stop you." No pleading, no desperation, no attempt to hold on. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else could have. Maya looked away. Because staying in that moment required something she wasn't sure she had anymore. "I need something more," she said quietly. Daniel didn't respond. Because he understood. Not fully, not emotionally, but logically. And sometimes, logic is the only thing left when feeling becomes too difficult to hold. That night, they slept in the same bed, but something had already ended. Not officially, not visibly, but completely. Because there is a point in every relationship where the future stops being shared, even if the present still is. And somewhere, beneath the silence of that room, a life they had built together began, finally, to come apart. There is no single moment when a life ends. No clear line, no final sound. It doesn't collapse all at once. It separates, piece by piece, habit by habit, until what once felt permanent becomes something remembered. The days that followed were strangely calm. Not peaceful. Not easy. Just organized. As though both of them had agreed, without saying it aloud, that chaos would only make things worse. So they avoided it. They spoke in practical sentences. Short ones. Necessary ones. "Ethan's school run. Can you manage this week?" "I'll sort the paperwork tomorrow." "Let me know what you need." There were no accusations. No raised voices. No dramatic scenes. And yet, everything had changed. Ethan noticed first. Not in words, in feeling. Children rarely need explanations. They recognize distance instinctively. "Mom, are you going somewhere?" he asked one evening, watching Maya fold clothes into a suitcase. "Just for a few days," she said gently. "With Dad?" "No." "With me?" Maya paused. Just for a second. "Not this time." Ethan frowned. "Why?" She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. because sometimes grown-ups need to figure things out. He considered that, then asked the only question that mattered. "Are you coming back?" Maya didn't answer immediately, and in that hesitation, everything was said. Daniel stood in the doorway, listening, not interrupting. Because there are moments where stepping in only makes things harder. And this was one of them. The night she left was quiet. No final argument. No dramatic goodbye. Just movement. A suitcase by the door. A coat lifted from its place. A life reduced to what could be carried. Daniel stood near the window, hands still, eyes steady. Maya moved through the space carefully, as though aware that every small action might carry more weight than intended. "I'll call," she said. Daniel nodded. "Okay." Another pause. Longer this time. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she added. He looked at her. "I know." And he did. That was the difficult part. Because understanding does not make things easier. It just removes the illusion that they could have been avoided. Ethan stood in the hallway, silent, watching. Maya crouched in front of him. "Be good for Dad," she said softly. "I am always good." She smiled faintly. "I know." He hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged her. Tightly. The way children do when they sense something slipping away. Maya closed her eyes. For a moment, just a moment, she almost stopped. Almost said something different. Almost stayed. But almost is a fragile thing. It rarely becomes action. She pulled away, stood, picked up her suitcase, and left. The door closed quietly. No sound. And yet, the silence that followed felt louder than anything before it. Daniel did not move immediately. He remained where he was, listening, as though something might change if he waited long enough. It didn't. Ethan looked up at him. "Is Mom coming back tomorrow?" Daniel swallowed. "No." "Next week?" "I don't know." Ethan nodded slowly. He didn't cry. That somehow made it harder. The flat felt different that night. Not emptier, just altered. As though the shape of things had shifted slightly, leaving everything just a little out of place. Daniel made dinner. Simple. Routine. Ethan ate quietly. Asked fewer questions. Spoke less. And in that silence, Daniel understood something he had not fully grasped before. This was no longer just about him. Across the city, Maya stood in a different space. Larger, warmer, more refined. Everything she had imagined. everything she had noticed in other people's lives. Soft lighting, clean surfaces, no compromise, no limitation. Adrian moved through the room with the same quiet confidence he carried everywhere else. "You'll get used to it," he said. Maya nodded. "I know." She placed her bag down slowly, looked around, took it in. This was what she had wanted, what she had worked toward, what she had chosen. And yet, something felt unfamiliar. Not wrong, just not settled. That night, she lay in a bed that was not hers, beside someone who was not unfamiliar, but not known in the same way. Adrian slept easily, as he always did. Maya did not. Because choice, once made, does not immediately feel like certainty. Sometimes, it feels like distance from what was, from who you were, from the version of yourself that once believed something different. Back in the flat, Daniel sat in the living room long after Ethan had gone to bed. The lights were off, the room quiet. He held nothing, did nothing, just sat. Because there are moments in life when action feels unnecessary, when understanding arrives fully, and all that remains is to sit with it. He thought of the years behind them, the small moments, the ordinary ones, the ones that never seemed important at the time. And he realized those were the ones that had mattered most. Upstairs, Ethan slept restlessly, turning slightly, reaching for something that was no longer there. There is a particular kind of absence that does not make noise. It doesn't demand attention. It simply exists in the spaces where something once was. And once you notice it, you cannot unsee it. Some endings are loud. This one wasn't. It ended the way it had changed, quietly, slowly, almost politely. There is a difference between having what you wanted and feeling fulfilled by it. At first, the difference is subtle, almost invisible. It hides behind comfort, behind novelty, behind the quiet satisfaction of change. But over time, it begins to surface, not as loss, but as something unfulfilled. Maya adjusted quickly. From the outside, it looked effortless. The new apartment was exactly as she had imagined. Spacious, carefully designed. Everything in its place, not because it had to be, but because it belonged there. There were no compromises, no small adjustments, no quiet calculations before spending. Things were simply chosen, and that alone felt like freedom. Her mornings were different now, slower, quieter. No rush to prepare breakfast, no school schedules to organize, no familiar routines that required constant attention. Instead, coffee by the window, soft light, silence that felt, at first, like relief. Adrian left early most days. Work remained central to his life, predictable, controlled. He did not expect conversation, did not require presence, and for a while, that suited her. At the office, Maya was more confident now, more assured. People listened when she spoke, not out of politeness, but because she had learned how to carry her voice differently. Adrian noticed. "You've settled in," he said one afternoon. "Yes." "You don't hesitate anymore." "I didn't realize I used to." "You did." Maya leaned back slightly. "And now?" "Now," he said calmly, "you know where you stand." She held his gaze. "And where is that?" A pause. Then, "Somewhere you should have been a long time ago." The words lingered. They were meant to reassure, to affirm, and yet they carried something else. Something that felt less like belonging and more like displacement. Evenings were quieter, more controlled. Dinner at places that did not require planning. Conversations that stayed on the surface unless invited deeper. Adrian was consistent, predictable in his own way, but not available. Not in the way Daniel had been. Not in the way that filled space without needing to be asked. Here, space remained, untouched. The first time she noticed it clearly was not during a conversation, not during a moment of silence, but in something much smaller. She was setting the table. 2 plates, 2 glasses. Everything aligned. Perfect. She paused, looked at it, and realized there was nothing wrong. And yet, it felt incomplete. She told herself it was adjustment. Time. Change always required a period of discomfort. That was normal. It would pass. But some things don't pass. They settle. She saw Ethan less often than she had planned. Not because she didn't want to, but because reaching out required something she had not yet figured out how to give. Every time she thought of calling, she hesitated. What would she say? How would she explain something she hadn't fully understood herself? So she delayed, and then delayed again. And over time, delay became distance. One evening, she finally called. The phone rang twice. Then, "Hello?" Ethan's voice. Small. Familiar. "Mom?" Maya closed her eyes for a second. "Yes, darling." A pause. Then, "Are you coming home?" The question was simple. Too simple. Maya swallowed. "No." Silence. Not long. Just enough. "Okay," he said. Too quickly. Too easily. That hurt more than anything else could have. "How's school?" she asked. "Fine." "What did you do today?" Maths. That's good. Yes. The conversation ended shortly after. Not because there was nothing to say, but because neither of them knew how to say it anymore. Maya sat with the phone in her hand long after the call ended. The room was quiet. Still. Perfect. And yet, something inside her felt unsettled. Across the city, Daniel sat beside Ethan on the sofa. The television played softly in the background. Neither of them were really watching. "Was that Mom?" Daniel asked. Ethan nodded. "What did she say?" "She asked about school." "And?" "I said it was fine." Daniel smiled faintly. "That sounds accurate." Ethan leaned slightly against him. "Is she happy?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Because some questions do not have answers that belong to children. "I think she's figuring things out," he said carefully. Ethan nodded. That seemed to be enough. Later that night, Daniel stood alone in the kitchen. The same space. The same light. But everything felt different. Not broken. Just quieter. He had started to adjust. Not fully. Not easily. But enough to function. Enough to move forward. Because life does not pause, even when parts of it end. Back in the apartment, Maya stood by the window again, looking out. City lights stretching endlessly into the distance. Everything she had wanted. Everything she had chosen. And yet, there it was again. That quiet feeling. Not regret. Not yet. Just absence. There is a particular kind of loneliness that does not come from being alone. It comes from realizing that what you have gained does not replace what you lost. She turned away from the window. The room remained exactly the same. Perfect. Untouched. And still, not quite enough. There is a kind of silence that follows loss that does not ask to be filled. It settles in, becomes part of the air, something you move through, rather than something you escape. Daniel did not fall apart in the way people expect. There were no visible breakdowns, no sudden collapse, no dramatic moments of grief that could be pointed to and named. Instead, there was quiet. A steady, uninterrupted quiet that followed him through everything. The days became structured, not because he wanted them to be, but because they had to be. Ethan needed routine. School, meals, sleep, stability. And Daniel gave it to him. Carefully. Consistently. Even on the days when it felt like he was moving through something heavier than exhaustion. He spoke less now, not intentionally, just naturally, as though words required more effort than before. At work, nothing had changed. The same desk, the same reports, the same measured expectations. And yet, everything felt slightly removed, as though he were participating without fully being present. It was during a call from Ethan's school that something shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. "Mr. Hayes," the voice said, calm but firm. "We've noticed a change in Ethan's performance." Daniel straightened slightly. "What kind of change?" "Nothing alarming, but he seems distracted, less engaged than before." Daniel nodded, though the person on the other end could not see it. "I understand. We'd like you to come in, just to discuss." "Of course." The school was quiet when he arrived. Midday. Corridors half empty. The kind of stillness that belongs only to places built around routine. He walked slowly, guided by directions he barely registered. Classroom 3B. The door was slightly open. He knocked once. "Come in." The voice was calm, clear. She stood by the desk. Hannah Reed. Not what he expected. There was nothing striking about her in the obvious sense. No immediate impression. No attempt to stand out. And yet, there was something in the way she held herself. Still. Composed. As though she understood silence in a way most people didn't. "You must be Daniel," she said. "Yes." She offered a small, polite smile. "Please, sit." The conversation was straightforward, measured, focused on Ethan, his work, his behavior, his recent quietness. "He's not disruptive," she said. "He just withdraws." Daniel nodded slowly. "He's adjusting." "Yes," she said gently. "And children adjust in ways that aren't always visible." A pause. Then, "He talks about you." Daniel looked up. "Does he?" "Yes." "What does he say?" "That you always keep your promises." The sentence landed softly, but it stayed. Daniel looked down briefly, then back at her. "I try." Hannah nodded. That matters more than most things. There was something about her tone. Not sympathetic, not distant, just understanding. Without assumption, without intrusion. And for reasons he could not explain, Daniel felt, for the first time in weeks, slightly less alone. "I'll keep an eye on him," she said. "And if anything changes, you'll let me know." "Yes." He stood. "Thank you." "Of course." He turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Reed," he said. "Yes?" "For what it's worth, I think he's lucky to have you." She held his gaze for a moment, then smiled, quietly. "And I think he's lucky to have you." Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, not easier, just clearer. That evening, Daniel sat with Ethan at the table. Homework spread between them. "Miss Reed says you're not focusing," Daniel said lightly. Ethan shrugged. "I am. Not as much as before." Another shrug. "She talks too softly." Daniel smiled faintly. "I don't think that's the problem." Ethan looked at him. Then, quietly, "I miss Mom." The words came without warning, without build-up, just truth. Daniel nodded. "I know." "Do you?" "Yes." A pause. Then, "Do you miss her?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Because the truth, in moments like these, is rarely simple. "Yes," he said finally. Ethan nodded. That was enough. Later that night, Daniel sat alone again. The same chair, the same room. But something had shifted. Not healed, not resolved. Just acknowledged. He thought of Hannah, her calm presence, the way she had spoken without pressing, without assuming, without trying to fix something that was not hers to fix. And he realized, some people do not arrive to change your life. They arrive to steady it. Across the city, Maya sat at a long dining table. Soft lighting, perfect arrangement. Adrian across from her, speaking, explaining something about work. She listened, nodded, responded where needed. Everything as it should be. And yet, something felt distant, unconnected. At one point, she glanced at her phone. No new messages. Not from Ethan. Not from Daniel. And for the first time, the silence felt different. Not peaceful. Not freeing. Just empty. She looked back at Adrian. He was still speaking, still composed, still exactly as he had always been. And suddenly, she realized something she had not allowed herself to think before. He had not changed her life. He had only offered her a different version of it. And those were not the same thing. Back in the quiet flat, Daniel turned off the light, sat in the dark, and for the first time since everything had shifted, he felt something new. Not hope, not yet, just movement. Because healing does not begin with strength. It begins with stillness. And the decision, quiet, almost invisible, to continue. Healing does not arrive all at once. It doesn't replace what was lost. It doesn't erase what happened. It simply begins. In small ways, quiet ways, almost unnoticeable at first. Daniel did not wake up one morning feeling better. There was no clear moment where things shifted from heavy to light. Instead, there were days that felt slightly easier than the ones before. Days where routine no longer felt like effort, but something closer to structure. Days where silence didn't press as heavily against him. It began, in part, with Ethan. Not because Ethan changed, but because Daniel started paying attention differently. More deliberately. More present. "Read it again," Daniel said one evening, sitting beside him at the table. Ethan sighed dramatically. "I already did." "Once isn't enough." "It should be." Daniel smiled faintly. "It never is." Ethan rolled his eyes, but read it again anyway. This time, slower, more careful. Daniel listened, not correcting immediately, not interrupting, just there. "You're getting better," he said when Ethan finished. "I know." "Confident, aren't you?" Ethan shrugged. "Miss Reed says I'm improving." Daniel nodded. "She's right." A pause. Then, "I like her," Ethan added. Daniel looked at him. "I do too." The school visits became more regular. At first, necessary. Then, something else. "His focus has improved," Hannah said one afternoon. They stood just outside the classroom, voices low. "He's still quiet, but not withdrawn." Daniel nodded. "That's good." "Yes." She hesitated slightly. Then, "You've helped." Daniel gave a small, almost dismissive shake of his head. He needed time. He needed presence, she corrected gently. A pause. Then, "You gave him that." Daniel looked at her. There was no judgment in her tone. No sympathy. Just recognition. And somehow, that felt different from anything else he had experienced recently. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For noticing." She smiled slightly. "That's my job." "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." They stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Not uncomfortable, not awkward, just still. There was something about Hannah that did not demand attention, and yet held it. Not because she tried to stand out, but because she did not need to. Over time, their conversations grew longer. Not intentionally, not planned, just gradually. They spoke about Ethan, then about school, then, occasionally, about things that had nothing to do with either. Books, weather, small observations about life that felt easier to share with someone who did not expect anything in return. One afternoon, as they walked out of the school gates together, Hannah said, "You don't talk about yourself much." Daniel glanced at her. "There's not much to say." "That's rarely true." Maybe I prefer listening. She considered that. Or maybe you're used to carrying things quietly. Daniel didn't respond, because some observations do not require confirmation. They walked a little further, then stopped at the corner where their paths separated. "Have a good evening," she said. "You too." He watched her walk away for a moment, then turned in the opposite direction. There was no urgency, no anticipation, just something steady, something calm. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel did not feel the need to question it. Across the city, Maya stood in front of a mirror she had once admired. Everything around her remained unchanged. The apartment, the lighting, the quiet perfection of it all. And yet, the feeling had shifted. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just enough. She had stopped noticing the details. That was the first sign. The things that once felt new no longer did. The silence that once felt peaceful now felt empty. Adrian moved through the space as he always had. Consistent, composed, unchanged. "Dinner at 8, he said one evening. "I might not be back by then," Maya replied. He nodded once. "Let me know." No question, no concern, just acceptance. She watched him for a moment, then asked, "Does it ever bother you?" "What?" "That things are like this." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "This," she gestured lightly. "Distance." He held her gaze. "There's no distance." "There is. Only if you expect something else." The words settled between them. Clear, precise, final. Maya looked away, because in that moment, she understood something she had not fully allowed herself to before. Adrian had never promised more. He had never suggested permanence, never offered anything beyond what he had already given. It had been her assumption, her interpretation, her expectation. And expectations, when unmet, do not disappear. They turn into something else. That night, she sat alone in the living room, phone in her hand, scrolling, stopping, starting again. She opened a message thread. "Ethan. Last message, weeks ago. A simple one. Good night, Mom." She stared at it, then locked the phone. There is a particular kind of regret that does not arrive loudly. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't overwhelm. It simply sits in the quiet, waiting to be acknowledged. Back in the flat, Daniel stood by the kitchen window. Ethan asleep upstairs. The house still, but no longer heavy. He had started to adjust, not because things were fixed, but because they were no longer uncertain. And certainty, even when painful, is easier to carry than doubt. He thought of Maya. Not constantly. Not the way he had before. Just occasionally. In passing. In memory. And for the first time, those thoughts did not hold the same weight, because something inside him had shifted. Not closed, not hardened, just moved forward. There are moments in life when you realize you are no longer waiting. Not for someone, not for something, just no longer waiting. And in that quiet realization, something new begins. There are endings that feel like conclusions, and then there are the ones that feel like understanding. Not everything returns. Not everything is rebuilt. But sometimes, something becomes clear in a way it never was before. Maya did not go back immediately. Not to Daniel. Not to the life she had left behind. Because return, when done too quickly, is often just another form of escape. And she had already done that once. For a few days, she stayed elsewhere. A quiet place. Temporary. Unfamiliar. Just enough distance to sit with what had happened. Without distraction. Without illusion. She thought of everything. Not just Adrian. Not just the apartment. But Daniel. Ethan. The life she had once called hers. The small things. The ordinary ones. The ones she had overlooked because they did not feel enough. She remembered mornings. Tea already made. Shoes tied without asking. A man who noticed everything without needing to be told. And for the first time, she understood what she had left behind. Not comfort. Not routine. But presence. There is a kind of love that does not demand attention. It simply remains. Until one day, it is no longer there. When she finally returned, it was not dramatic. No announcement. No expectation. Just a knock on the door. Daniel opened it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked different. Not physically, but in the way she held herself. Less certain. More aware. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. Daniel nodded once. "That makes sense." No anger. No accusation. Just acknowledgement. "Can I come in?" she asked. A pause. Then, "Yes." The flat felt smaller than she remembered. Simpler. Unchanged. And yet, it felt more real than anything she had experienced in weeks. Ethan was in the living room. When he saw her, he didn't run. Didn't speak immediately. He just stood there. "Mom," he said finally. Maya moved toward him slowly, as though unsure whether she still belonged in that space. "I'm here," she said softly. He nodded. Once. then stepped forward and hugged her. Not tightly, not urgently, just enough. And that hurt more than anything else. Because love, once broken, does not always return the same way. Later, after Ethan had gone to bed, they sat in the same room again. Daniel on one side, Maya on the other. The space between them unchanged, and yet completely different. "I'm sorry," she said. The words were quiet, not rehearsed, not performed, just real. Daniel didn't respond immediately, because apologies do not undo what has already been lived. "I thought," she hesitated, "that I was choosing something better." He looked at her. "And?" "I was choosing something easier to believe in." A pause. Then, "I was wrong." Daniel nodded slowly. Not in agreement, but in understanding. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," she continued. She stopped, because there was nothing she could say that would simplify what had happened. "I don't expect things to go back," she said finally. Daniel held her gaze. "They can't." The truth of it, simple, complete. Silence settled. Not uncomfortable, not heavy, just honest. "Is there any chance?" she asked. The question was quiet, careful, almost hesitant. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, not searching, not struggling, just seeing. There was no anger in him anymore, no bitterness, no need to hold on to what had already been lost. "I don't regret loving you," he said. Maya's breath caught slightly. "It mattered," he continued. "What we had, it mattered." She looked down, tears forming quietly. "But love isn't always enough to rebuild something," he said. She nodded, because she knew. Now, she understood. "I've let go," he said gently. "Not because I stopped caring." A pause. "But because I had to." The words did not break her. They settled, like truth often does. Maya wiped her eyes. "I understand." And this time, she did. "I don't want to disappear from Ethan's life," she said. "You won't?" Another pause. Then, "From yours?" Daniel looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, there was something there. Not love, not the same way, just memory. "You'll always be part of my life," he said. "Just not the same way." And that was the ending. Not of everything, but of what they had been. Days passed. Slowly, steadily, Maya began rebuilding something else. Not the same life, not the same identity. Something quieter, more honest. She saw Ethan more often, spoke less, listened more, learned, slowly, how to return without expecting things to be as they were. Daniel continued forward. Not quickly, not dramatically, just steadily. And somewhere in that quiet movement, Hannah remained. Not as replacement, not as contrast, but as something else. Something calm, something present, something that did not need to be proven. One evening, standing outside the school, she said, "You seem different." Daniel looked at her. "I am." She nodded. "That's a good thing." He smiled slightly. Yes. There was no urgency, no expectation, just possibility. And sometimes that is enough. There are stories that end with reunion, with forgiveness that restores everything, with love that returns stronger than before. This was not one of them. This was a story about understanding, about choices, about what it means to leave and what it costs. And in the end, it was not about who was right or who was wrong. It was about something quieter, something more difficult. The difference between love and enough. He had once believed love meant holding on. It took him years to understand that sometimes love's final act is letting go.